Hey, and welcome back to the Background Noise Podcast, where today we're talking about the best superhero movie that's ever been made, Morbius. But before we do that, we got to get through some introductory stuff. So, as has been discussed before, I am currently doing streams on Twitch, playing Pokemon, sometimes joined by the fellow cast of the Background Noise. And this week, actually, because I have a fairly open schedule, I may or may not, on the day that Jack posts this, I may or may not actually already be streaming, because I'm going to be trying to be streaming every day in the afternoon this week. We'll see. We'll see if that happens.
Sweet.
We'll see. I don't actually make promises, because last time I tried to stream, I had tech problems. But
fair enough.
Assuming the things work out, we'll be doing that.
You'll get it when you get it. All right.
Yeah. Fortunately, I don't think I will have as many problems with my stream as this movie had problems. Because if you couldn't tell from my little weirdly cut, horribly edited intro, we are talking about Morbius, the newest member of the Sony Marvel universe thing. I don't know what we call this.
Pretty much, Sony, what is it? TFU, the Trash Fire Universe.
Well, before we get into that, we should, to spare everyone else the trouble of having to go and watch this movie yourself.
Oh yes, please don't watch this.
Please, I'll give you the synopsis. I'll give you a more competently presented synopsis of this movie than the movie itself will present. So Michael Morbius is a guy with an unspecified genetic disorder that makes him all frail and weak, and he has a friend named Milo, who also has an unspecified genetic disorder that makes him all frail and weak. Morbius becomes this famous doctor trying to find a cure to his disease, and somehow he comes to the conclusion that obviously the solution to their problem is bats, because they need to take bat DNA and add it to human DNA, and then that'll fix all of their problems with their unspecified genetic disorder. Obviously,
Joe, hold on, Joe. They're vampire bats.
Yes, of course.
Don't you get that vampire bats drink blood?
Yeah, I think it is a blood disorder. It's a genetic disorder that causes a blood disease or something, and so that's
like it needs to be like, I think they either need to be given new blood like 3 times a day, or their old blood needs to be taken out and new blood needs to be put in. I don't know what it is, but it's something bloody.
Something unspecified genetic disorder.
Who would have thought the solution would be something that a 3rd grader would think of? Well, why don't we get the vampire bats and turn into vampires?
We're still going through the synopsis here. I'm trying to be more competently done than the movie. All right, so he finds the bats, and suddenly he's on a ship where he's putting the DNA into himself because of reasons, and then of course he immediately turns into a vampire, because that's what happens with science, right? You put that DNA into your body and you turn into a vampire, with like weird dark particle effects following his body. Like the superpowers, the super strength and the drinking blood I'm fine with. The weird dark particle effects, that's a bridge too far. But he kills almost everyone on the ship except for the girl who is kind of maybe his girlfriend, I guess, and is the nurse that's helping him.
It's the only female main character, so she has to be.
Maybe. Yeah, I guess so. And so he kills everyone, and then he comes back, and he comes back to New York, and he's like, oh, wow, I'm so much stronger, and everything is better now, except for the fact that I need to drink blood all the time, and maybe I'm a menace to society. And then his friend Milo comes up, and he's like, hey, dude, you know how we were doing that thing to make us not sick anymore? And you got the thing for me? And he says, I'm sorry, I can't give it to you, because it turned me into a horrible bloodthirsty monster. And then Milo's like, well, I'm already a horrible monster of a person, so I don't care. So he ends up like going behind Morbius's back and taking the serum himself, also turns into a vampire. And then basically the second half of the movie is Morbius trying to find a way to stop Milo, and Milo spiraling further and further into killing more and more people around New York, just like absolutely massacring anyone he comes into contact with. And then finally we have a really weird fight scene where Morbius like throws bats at him. I guess he like summons bats by screaming, even though he's almost dead, and then he just sends bats with his. Yeah.
Yes, and for some reason, despite them both having the exact same genetic, both taking the exact same vampire serum, Milo can't control bats for some reason. Only Morbius can.
Only Morbius, and also I think only Morbius can fly. Maybe no, I think we do see Milo fly a bit.
I think he's the only one that does it sugar glider style.
Maybe. And then well, so he finally defeats them by he because science caused the problem, because obviously, bad DNA caused the problem. Science fixes the problem because they inject him with some science, and the science unsciences Milo's sciencey powers, and then he sciences to death. That's as good of an explanation as we get in the movie.
Not the science.
And then we cut to the girlfriend who had been dead earlier in the movie coming back to life for some reason, because maybe she's now a vampire herself. And then we cut to the Vulture from the MCU Spider-Man continuity appearing in a prison in this continuity, and then we get an end credit scene where he decides to team up with Morbius, and it makes no sense whatsoever.
Batman teams up with Batman.
Yeah, the guy with weird flying powers teams up with the other guy with weird flying powers. So,
before we even get into the movie, I feel like do we want to touch on that end credit scene briefly, just so we don't have to go back to it?
Sure, let's do it.
I feel like they want to set up a Sinister Six. I just think it's a bad idea. I feel like it's going to be really pushed. They're really trying to force it, and that never works out, ever.
I feel like Sony was trying to set up their own Sinister Six, but then realized that No Way Home did like their own, and they're like, no, they took it. They took it from us. They took it from me, Carlisle. That was today. and they're just like, no, fine. They did it. We'll do our own. And then it's just this. Oh, it's just sad. It's just I don't even know what do they have a plan? It's just like, listen, guys, these two they might be in the Sinister Six. What movie they'll be in 5 years from now? You'll just have to stick around to find out. It's just so. It's it's pathetic.
Well, what's even annoying aside from that is they're just starting out with those two guys, right? Just Morbius and Vulture. Morbius is very clearly not. There's really nothing sinister about him. He's just sort of like this anti-hero, or I mean, he's pretty. I guess anti-hero. I don't even know if you call him a hero, but he's not a bad guy. He's just a science experiment gone wrong kind of guy. But he didn't become evil and start stealing or anything like that. He just wants to know how to survive without killing people, which I never think they actually figured out how to do that. But we'll get to that.
Nope.
And then you have Vulture, who I feel like almost is redeemed at the end of Spider-Man 1 because, first off, you really feel for him the entire movie. And then when he finally is captured, he doesn't give up Peter Parker's secret identity because Peter Parker saved his life. So you'd think, oh, maybe Vulture's redeemed and maybe he could end up becoming good or something like that, or at least not becoming bad again, because I feel like just the same thing would happen. So both of them becoming members of Sinister Six, Vulture seems more likely than Morbius. But considering last time we saw both of them, it doesn't seem like that makes sense for either of their characters. It seems like if they were going to do that, it would be very forced.
That is exactly it. That's what happens when you give incompetent writers well-written characters. With pre-established,
The only other character that we have in this universe is Venom, right? And Venom isn't a villain either in this continuity, really.
Right.
He's an anti-hero, but he's not a villain. So it doesn't.
You've got the slightly sympathetic 3.
Yeah, right. Slightly. Well, let's. I do want to start off. I wanted to start off on a positive note. And we're already past the point, but I do want to take us back. What are the few things that we actually liked about this movie? The things that are actually good. Just go over some positives so we can separate the wheat from the chaff here.
Okay, you can tell the editors, they might have had guns to their heads, but they did their job very well, cobbling together this this mess, because it's not their fault that it's a mess. They were told, listen, make this work. We have 3 weeks. And they said, okay. And then eventually that 3 weeks got extended into what, 3 years? Or 2 years?
I think 2 years at least, yeah.
2 years. So yeah, they tried, and it's not their fault. And the special effects look okay.
Yeah, I mean, if they look, we'll get to that.
I thought we were listing the good.
The thing I really liked, and Joe probably mentioned this as well, been a huge fan of Matt Smith for years. He was, for those who watch Doctor Who, he was the 11th Doctor, just a great actor in my opinion. He was also in the film Last Night in Soho, which came out last year. That was Edgar Wright's newest movie. He was very good in that. Wish he would get more bigger roles because he just nails every role that he's in. And he was a lot of fun in this movie. Mm-hmm. And any time he was in the scene, he would always steal it. So definitely enjoyed it for him. He was great. And I'm thankful that he was a pretty decent part of the movie. He was in a lot of scenes. The detectives I actually thought were funny enough. I didn't mind them. I thought they were fine. I thought they added some decent humor to the movie, and I liked them well enough, I guess.
Yeah, this movie would have been better if it was a buddy cop drama of those two hunting down a vampire.
We gotta track down this Mikey Morbius fella.
Yeah, I do appreciate the idea that they at least at one point attempted to think about talking about, because they were, when Morbius he's got the science juice and he's going to inject himself with the science juice, and his girlfriend, his maybe girlfriend at the time, I don't know what the relationship is at that point, is like talking about, is it okay to do this? Is it okay to modify human DNA in this way? What are the risks? What are the moral implications? Like, that was an interesting idea that they really could have explored and had some, there could have been some meaty story there. And then exploring the internal conflict of the man versus self, which there are a couple moments where you think that they're setting that up, right? There's, where Morbius is fighting with himself over a couple of things. And it's like, oh, that could have been interesting. And so I like the idea of what the story could have been if it had been focused and intelligently written and competently produced and everything else, which I think we've probably exhausted our source of the good. And I think that transitions us into the what went wrong of this movie.
Oh, yes. Yes!
You sound excited. You want to start us off?
You know what? Why not? Well, I'll tell you one thing, and one thing only. That's a lie. I'm going to tell you several things. First of all, this movie should have come out in 2004. It is, to me, it seems like it was made in the same style of like old Daredevil, in the sense that the same style of just like it's overly dark, but not too dark, because we gotta get those teenagers money in. Yeah, we gotta get those teenagers in to watch the movie or whatever. Because it's just like, I mean, it just makes sense because, like, overly dark, melodramatic, just a horribly overwrought with filler and just, I don't know, kind of like Daredevil and Elektra and admittedly Ghost Rider. I'm a fan of Ghost Rider, but it's not a good movie. And since it's a Marvel movie, that's why I'm bringing it up. There's only one real female lead, and of course, it has to be the love interest. Again, there's Elektra, there's Johnny Blaze's girlfriend, there's the older mentor. He's got to die, and he does. He winds up dying. And what is it? Of course, there's the villain that has the same or the similarly sourced like power set as the hero. And it's just all these together make it seem so dated. Mm-hmm. And like not in the funny way. It's not like, oh, we're paying homage to the no. It's just, it feels like you woke up a bunch of people. You woke up a bunch of production people who were in cryo sleep from the 90s, and like, all right, we got this dude. He's Morbius. He's a vampire, but he doesn't have all the weaknesses of a vampire. I don't know. Give us something. And they're like, okay. Oh yeah, and throw Spider-Man in there. Except we don't have rights to him. Well, not really. That's complicated. And it's just, it simultaneously tries to be like Amazing Spider-Man 2 in the sense of, it tries to do a lot, but at the same time does nothing of real entertainment value or creative value was found. It's just so much nothing. It's like a movie of filler for a C-list like Spider-Man villain. And it wasn't. I think Morbius is actually really cool in terms of a character. It's like, again, he's kind of a direct product of the 90s. Ooh, we got this new and edgy guy. He's a vampire. He's conflicted. And it's like, it seems like those cliff notes, and like you said, Joe, just sort of like the theme of exploring these things, they're not even shallow as a, like, it's beyond, it's mega shallow. It's just like they say it as like, yes, what this conflict, is this right? And then they go back and then they just cut to him just slaughtering people without blood, by the way. A vampire movie without blood. That's the other big thing. And it's just so, there's so much wrong. But yeah, what do you guys think?
I think actually the Amazing Spider-Man 2 analogy is actually pretty apt, because there were some scenes, like when I watch Amazing Spider-Man 2, there are scenes that I enjoy because they're funny or because they got some cool action piece or whatever, things like that. And then but when you take the whole thing as a complete movie, it's like, okay, there's nothing actually here. There's a little. Amazing Spider-Man 2 isn't as bad as Morbius. It actually has a little bit there, maybe. This one, all of the scenes that I like are the scenes that have Matt Smith in them, because it's Matt Smith, so obviously. And then everything else is just like, okay, why is this here?
Right.
This might as well be an episode of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
For all the good, all the good could be turned into an episode of Doctor Who. Apparently,
be awesome.
An episode of Doctor
Vampires. I watched that.
And maybe where Matt Smith turns into a vampire. I'm okay with that. I'll watch that episode.
Be awesome.
Jack, I think you're about to say something.
Oh, sure. Yeah, if you were done, I was just going to mention a few things that didn't quite work for me. Because first off, and I feel like Joseph pretty much already touched on this, it's pretty bland, formulaic, and really didn't add anything new. Considering this is only the third of like the Sony Spider-Verse movies after the first two Venom films, at least with Venom, it felt like, a sort of buddy cop film, which I liked. And I really, it was different enough where I enjoyed it, and it felt different enough and it worked for me. Whereas this just felt like it was trying to be this grounded, more serious film, a superhero film, and they didn't even try to embrace their vampire roots. Nope. So instead of doing that and giving us something that could have been different for the superhero genre, I guess, they just gave us a mediocre superhero film. And it's a shame too, because they had some really cool scenes, like even the scene on the boat that could have been very cool, had some horror elements to it. That, and even the scene where the nurse gets killed off. Both those scenes I thought were very cool, and they try to lean more, if they could have leaned more in that area and more vampire heavy instead of superhero that's a vampire heavy. Definitely, I feel like would have helped the film. What else was it?
And
but yeah.
Sorry,
no, go for it.
I was going to say, and even then, the little parts of, and I put horror in air quotes on the podcast. Once again, air quotes on the podcast. In air quotes, it's just like, oh yeah, all the advertisement was like, oh, this is the first MCU horror movie, or it's like it was presented that way at first, with him being like all the gangly looking Jared Leto, and then him like tearing people apart, and then once people realized, okay, yeah, no, this has been delayed 3 times, and they're like, all right, fine, go to the old fallback, show him flying and beating people up or something, and it's just like, I feel like it was just. Well, and we'll probably get into editing later, but it's like it suffered from, hey, we don't want this to be too scary or something. Maybe they could bring the kids. I don't know, but it just seems like it got neutered.
Well, there's a thing, like, when I watched one of the trailers, because they showed him on the boat, and it seemed like they kind of made it seem like he was on a boat and killed. The way it presented it in that particular trailer, I thought he's on the boat, something happens to him while he's on the boat, he gets turned into the vampire person by accident, and then he shows up in New York. Like, that's the way it seemed presented to be in the trailer, and I thought, wow, this is really cool, because in the actual book, Bram Stoker's Dracula, that is almost exactly how Dracula shows up in England, is that he gets on board a ship, he's puts a coffin full of dirt on the board the ship, and he comes out in the middle of the night and he kills everyone on board, and then the ship shows up in England, and then that's how all the stuff that happens in that book takes place. It's like, oh wow, these people know their vampire lore, they know their vampire lore, and they're going to do this little homage to that, and that doesn't happen. No, the ship is just kind of there because there's an offhand remark about how we have to do this in international waters because our experiment is highly illegal. And so now we're on a ship because we want to have a set piece where he kills every single person that he can find. But we want to make it so there aren't too many people for him to kill, so it has to be on a boat. I guess that's why he's on the boat. So like, just that's like a microcosm of the things that annoyed me about this movie. So,
oh shoot, I had something, I can't remember what it was. There was
that's a good word, annoying. This film could be described as just annoying.
Yep.
I mean,
well, and then go ahead, Jack.
No, I was gonna say, I mean, we already mentioned the blood a little bit, but if we had just gone with the vampire roots, animal blood would have been a very, I feel like, better choice instead of using the blue blood, which has got a bit annoying. But the animal blood that's been used with other vampires before, I feel like that would have made more sense. But I feel like that just goes back to them not thinking of this as a vampire film. They thought of this as a superhero film, and it just wasn't. But oh, I remember what I was going to say, though. You had mentioned the whole thing about you thought it was going to be an accident, and just thinking on it now, it would be a much more compelling story, and it always, I'd say 90% of the time, it is a more compelling story when a character situation is an accident, not a failed science experiment.
If it's done right.
Well, yeah, I don't even know if that's necessarily the case. Why do you think so? Why do you prefer it?
Well, because of an accident, then they have to struggle with something that didn't happen to them, and they can't even blame themselves for it. Whereas if it's a failed science experiment, they did it, so it's their fault. And it's just, I mean, I don't know if it's always better, but it's just interesting because it's not them being cocky or not doing enough research that messed up. It was just something happened out of their control, and now they have to live with that.
I suppose I don't know that I have a preference. I like it. I think it can be done well either way, as long as it is done well. The question is not which of these is a better starter. Right. The question is, can you competently present it?
Yeah. And I guess my thought is the failed science experiment thing is something that's been done more recently. So I feel like the accident thing hasn't happened as much recently, so it would have been a more welcome thing to do in the film versus the failed science experiment that happens. I mean, let's see, Dr. Octopus that happens, Lizard that happens. I feel like a lot of villain stories, the only one that I can think of that wasn't the case was Electro. That was definitely an accident. But most of these other ones that have happened, Norman Osborn, same thing. These are all failed science experiments, and it's like, it'd be nice if instead of them just being cocky scientists, they had, no control. Especially if it's a hero. That you get that in DC sometimes. Like there's just one character named Metamorpho where that happens, or just he falls into like this vat or something, or there's some sort of chemical accident that he has no control over, and he has to live with being this hideous monster and all that. It's just, I don't know. I like both, and I feel like the failed science experiment is something, especially with Marvel and even Spider-Man characters, is something they've been pushing a lot more recently, and it'd be nice if they would have a bit more variety, because I don't think that helped with the film.
It is funny that really is one of the real... Sorry, Joe, didn't mean to...
No, I was just gonna say that's fair. That is a fair criticism, which is that all of Spider-Man villains are failed science experiments, and we want some variety.
Yeah.
And that makes sense because I mean these guys are coming from the Silver Age, right? This is like, yes, I got bitten by a radioactive goblin and turned into, or like I was experimenting with radioactive goblins. But just the
I was experimenting with radioactive goblins, as one does.
I don't think Joseph's ever read a comic book.
But
I love it.
You get what I mean, though.
Yeah, we understand.
The failed scientist or the scientist turned villain archetype is just straight from that era, and that just brings it out more of just like, yeah, of course they tried to do this because it's a cliche at this point. He could not be a Spider-Man villain, and they do that. And the problem is, I kind of agree with you, but the other problem is they can still do it in the modern day and it work. I mean, what is it? I'm thinking of, since you brought up DC, it's like Morbius is kind of there's some parallels between him and Mr. Freeze, I suppose, kind of like the remade Mr. Freeze, because originally he was just some dude with an ice gun, and then I think it was the animated series that gave him the more sympathetic backstory or whatever. He's like, he's an anti-hero. He does bad things for, air quotes, good reasons or something, and then it's just, you can do it right, but I mean, this guy, it would have been better if it was out of his control, because then you could put in like the whole thing about, oh man, all my life things have been out of my control, my blood disease, getting bitten by the radioactive vampire monster or whatever the heck it was, but now I can finally take control, and be really super edgy about it or something. At least be,
I mean, he is Jared Leto,
edgy,
so he's
be really
good.
edgy about it. Not this half measure, not this Jared Leto edgy.
I will say, for it being a Jared Leto led film, it's one of the most tame performances he has had.
That reminds me. That reminds me of something. I was looking up like the Wikipedia stuff to brush up on the names, and I read it's like, oh yes, Jared Leto actually really enjoyed the character's struggle with things like disease and whatnot, and he actually did not have to refer to his technique of method acting while portraying the character, because he felt that he was more like he had more in common with it than other characters. And I'm like, okay,
so that just means he felt like being a nice guy on set this time.
Apparently he didn't go full method, and apparently has a lot in common with a super genius who just happens to also be a tragic monster. God, stroke your ego more, why don't you?
Yep.
Joke.
Now
the next 20 minutes are going to be me dunking on Jared Leto. So,
oh well, I was going to go back to the presentation of the movie, like, because we've talked a bit about how there was no blood in this movie. This vampire movie has zero blood in it, and which is a symptom of a larger problem. Which I think, Jack, you might have told me this. It seems like it was a 2-hour long R-rated movie that got cut down to an hour and a half long PG-13 movie.
Yep. Yeah, I mentioned that.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't do a very good cutting job. It's like someone said, okay, well, here's all of the scenes that make it R-rated. We're just going to remove them and not put them back in censored. We're just going to take them out. And then here's all the stuff that's on the edge, and that stuff will censor,
right,
but not give any explanation.
Well, in a way, it's almost literally that, because literally they, did a bad cutting job on the cutting room floor, and by removing all the blood, it makes Morbius look like he did a very bad cutting job. He's not killing any of these guys; he's just scraping them.
Yep.
So. I mean, yeah, that's the other thing. It's like these guys are getting like hit at like 50 miles an hour by a dude with like the 5-inch long acrylics or whatever, and they're like going, and then like nothing's going on. It's like
a bunch of babies.
You good?
Yeah, right.
You choking on something? What's going on?
He's like, oh gosh, he was just it wasn't even Morbius that killed him. They had some gum he was choking on, and that's what killed him.
It just scared him. Morbius didn't kill a single person in this movie. Heart attack, choking. What is it? Even Matt Smith. Really, it was the bats.
It was the bats.
Yeah.
And I feel like Milo should have been able to control the bats, which I feel like I already mentioned. But
Yes, you did.
That's still,
but
yeah.
Oh, that's another thing from the early 2000s, power inconsistency.
Yeah.
yeah, well, that's another annoying thing. But that's the thing is like when it was just him being super strong and being a vampire, I was fine with that. When he starts adding like basically supernatural level powers to that, I'm thinking, okay, this does not fit. This does not fit the tone that you set up at the beginning of him being a scientist and this being a sciencey kind of movie. And there's just tonal inconsistencies throughout the entire thing. I don't know. Is it a horror movie? Is it an action movie? Is it a buddy cop drama between these two cops that are hunting them down? Is it like what is going on in this movie? What is the theme? What is the tone? Where are the acts? There's no 3-act structure. It's just like here are some things that are happening. Congratulations, you watch some things happening, and they don't form a coherent story at all.
Look at this. Look at this
Yeah.
plot. It's raw. Look at it. Look.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
Did anybody else feel like with the final battle, it was like there was some little fighting here and there, but it just felt way too short, and it just felt like they were leading up to this epic battle that never happened. It was just bats in Matt Smith's face.
Yeah.
About either of them at that point, and of course it's the punch me, punch you. I'm feeling a little woozy here. Second wind, and then the end.
Yeah. Yes. It literally. There was no because he gets scratched across the chest, which I guess he's dying, even though there's no blood because no blood.
Right.
And then he's like, but also the most hilarious part about that is that Milo is also looking at him like, "Why are you injured?"
Right.
He doesn't see the blood.
Wow, I'm
It's
starting
I almost feel like I don't know what was going on there. If that was just more bad editing or whatnot, but it actually made it kind of unintentionally hilarious. And then suddenly he's like dying, and then he screams in pain, and then bats, and then it's over. It's like, what? Okay. How? All right.
Yeah.
Don't ask questions. Just watch Morbius 2. More Morbius.
More.
And the third one is more Morbius.
Oh no.
More Morbius.
Or most Morbius.
The Mobius.
Mobier
the
and
Mobius.
Mobiusist.
Oh god.
Mostest Mobius.
Oh, Christ. Stop it. Okay. Well, have we exhausted the well of what went wrong, or do we have more complaints to make?
Like Michael Morbius, I'm getting a second wind. I actually didn't, but I mean, it's just so much filler. You'd think with the opening it was actually okay, I guess. I mean, we've talked about the ship thing that was just, I guess one of many little inconsistencies that made everything just bogged down. But it's just like it was a decent opening act, and then the whole second act. I would say that the whole second act is just pure nothing. Like even the little development we get with Matt Smith, it's just nothing was lost. You could leave that on the cutting room floor and nothing would be lost. And then there's the third act, which was disappointing. There's the post-credit scene, which is disappointing. Even when you go in with no expectations, it's just, guys, really. I think part of it is just because, I mean, we all know Sony's long past fumbled the ball with their little chance at Marvel stuff. They've fumbled it into the sewer and then fell into the sewer trying to get it, and then just got, I don't know, sepsis because they scraped the knee earlier. Yeah, it's bad. But even then, you don't think it would get this just not good.
Yeah, there is one last little positive thing I wanted to point out, just because I happen to remember it.
No.
Yes, I will say it.
No,
I did like him exploring his powers, because it did seem much more like what a scientist would have done. Like he's sitting there and he's documenting the things with his little recorder, and he's like testing his sonar abilities and things like that. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. It's like, and that's one of those things where it's like, okay, this is a really cool scene, and everything else is garbage around it. Like other than that little scene. So
Yeah.
so it makes the movie. It almost makes the movie worse because there's this little piece of good there where you're like, well, why couldn't they have been that good with the rest of the movie?
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
so we're pretty much have thoroughly torn this movie apart. And so now we're going to try to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And we're going to have a segment that I like to call Better Pitches with Jack, because
Nice.
because Jack gave me a lot of good pitches for better versions of the movie. And so we want to discuss some options for better stories, competent, coherent stories that they could have told.
I will be the old, out of touch Sony executive in this exercise. So yes, Jack, wow me.
I guess I did do more than one to you, Joe. I only remember the one that we've stuck with as being our favorite one. So I guess I'll just do that one first, which is, it wouldn't have worked to have released it now because we just had the Batman come out. But if they wanted to do a darker tone and not do a lighthearted, almost buddy cop vibe like Venom, that would have been fine. But then to do that, they should have had a gritty detective story. They could still call it Morbius, but don't focus on Morbius. Focus primarily on the two detectives, make it their story. And you have Milo is sort of their consultant, who is an old friend of Morbius, and he is sort of the detective's contact, trying to help them find him, because the detectives are seeing all of these killings that apparently Morbius had done and committed. And it's only about the end of the second act, beginning of the third act, they realize most of these killings, except for the one on the boat, we'll keep that, but most of the other killings were actually done by Milo, and he's been trying to lead them off his trail and have, frame Morbius for it.
Not bad, kid. Not bad. Pretty good. I gotta say though, it probably would. People would draw it to the Batman and whatnot because of that, and I think that sounds like something maybe the Marvel of 2014 would try. I mean, was it Guardians of the Galaxy level? Hey, let's experiment. I would definitely think that they would probably have to be some. You could give more attention to the little buddy cop thing, which would probably be more interesting since that was a slightly better element in the cut we got. But definitely give Morbius more screen time, I suppose. I don't know how you'd work him in there very well. You could still keep him as like the scientist, or you could maybe even have him try to hide the fact that he's turned into this vampire.
Oh sure, yeah. Well, he's still in the film, and I would try to, if possible, if I had written this movie, would have tried to give the detectives and Morbius pretty much equal screen time, because originally you're following, and Joe needs to get credit for this as well because he helped flesh this out a bit more. But basically, by the time the third act happens, you want to be cheering for Morbius because you knew he wasn't the killer, or at least we're hoping. But you want to like Milo enough where his twist, was frustrating because you did like him too. You liked both of them. When the third act happens, you are cheering for the good guy and want the bad guy to go down.
Yeah. And it would also help that the little change that I grabbed onto most there is that they're not like Milo and Mikey Morbius aren't family anymore, which is just it felt like a very cheap writing 101 way, or a writing 101 student way to get me to care about their relationship. It's like, guy, don't you care about Milo, right? Because Morpheus cares about him. Okay, well, that's literally all. It's literally all. And they have the same disease. That's it.
I wouldn't even mind keeping the whole family aspect. We don't have to, but I'm really thinking the film sort of changes after basically the nurse gets killed. that's when sort of the chunk of the film really starts. Like we have the early part with Morbius and all that might be shown in flashbacks and stuff like that, just so we can really understand Morbius's motivation and try to feel for him. But the start of the film would probably be pretty much after the nurse gets killed by Milo, but of course we think it's Morbius.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we just get a lot more killings like that, and throughout that, I feel like they could have made this a 90-minute film, honestly, if you just set it up with that instead of all this unnecessary filler. You don't need the romantic interest or anything like that. And I feel like that would have been a much tighter film that would have worked if not released, within a month of the Batman coming out, because we don't need two gritty detective stories within the same month.
Yep.
If they had just stuck to the original timetable, they would have been able to do that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. The other pitch that you have brought up, I thought was kind of good, is, and this would actually work very well. Actually, ironically, works even better if it's an accident. But it'd be a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of situation.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
So it's like Morbius is going around the world. He's trying to find a cure to his disease, and something happens, and he gets bitten, and he turns into this like he gets bitten by something. Not he injects himself with science juice. It's he gets bitten, and it awakens this monstrous thing in him, and then so we get scenes of him doing he's going about his life, and then something happens, like he smells blood maybe, and then he blacks out, and then he's watching a newsreel of people got murdered by some monstrous thing, and he sees that his jacket is covered in blood and is torn up and things like that. He's like, did I do that? Right. And so if we got some kind of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing where it's very leaning into he is fighting with himself the entire time of trying to control this monster. Like he's glad that he has the monster because it means he's not going to die anymore, but also he can't really live with it.
Right. So it's basically like, I mean, for those who've seen the first episode of Moon Knight, it'd be like if Moon Knight was a bad guy.
Yeah, actually, that's a very good analogy. Yeah. That would
spoilers for Moon Knight. I didn't know he was a good guy. You've ruined it for me, Jack.
You didn't know that the title character of a Marvel property is the hero of said property?
I mean, they threw us for a loop with WandaVision, so.
Sony's the only one that, does movies like lead movies where the lead is the bad guy normally. So.
I like right. It. Fellas, I like it. This is primo stuff. However, I must put a pin in these films and give you my own wonderful take. Of course, Sony is based in Brooklyn, of course.
Of course.
But anyway, well, I like the mystery. I like the, I guess, dual Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing. But I also think it would work well to have an actual theme in the film and have it be science versus mysticism. Because, what is it? The Marvel comics have actual vampires, the kind that Blade hunts down and stuff like that. And I know, what is it? Marvel's getting into that now, whatever. Sony should have just said, all right, forget it. Morbius versus Dracula, or the closest thing we can get away with. And it's like, Morbius is the living vampire. He's a vampire made by science and genetic stuff eventually, essentially. Or it could be that like he is turned into a vampire in the traditional sense with all the weaknesses. And then we like go with the whole theme of, hey, is it right for me to like kind of try to fix myself? Like, what is it? He gets turned into a vampire and it fixes his blood disease, but now he's a vampire. So he's like, hey, why don't I use my science to get rid of all these negatives? And then he realizes, maybe I can give myself some positives too. And that's where he gets his powers from. And he like gets drunk on power or something, which plays more into that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing. At first it was an accident, but now it's just an excuse to kind of go wild. And then it could have been the man versus self, a little bit of man versus stuff like that. And then in the second act, you get an acolyte of the mystic vampire, whatever. It's like, you're no vampire, boom. It's, I don't know, something like that. There's some confrontation where it's like he has to. Again, we're going all out. Forget this realism. We're going all out.
Edward from Twilight shows up in the second act.
No.
Offended.
No. Abort. Mayday. We're going down. No. SOS.
Ah!
All right. None of that.
Made me go full Paul Dano, Jack. I hated it. But anyway. But yeah, that could be a bunch of things. It's just like, I feel like, I don't know, the showcasing him being able to overcome this thing, like, of being turned into a vampire, and then he turns into the original Morbius, being like the living vampire. It still wouldn't explain the particle effects, but I feel like that's a better start. And then, I mean, yeah, we could do away with the mysticism part, but I mean, it'd be better than just Matt Smith, and he's just Morbius now. Ooh, it's like, I don't know. There's that, and then we have the elements of the buddy cop duo trying to figure it out, and then, you know, I don't know. Maybe the female lead's a vampire hunter. Like, I don't know, something. Mine's more. I don't know. Mine's a little more. Hey, let's fix Morbius before we get into the good juicy movie details. So it's not really a pitch in that sense. I'm not good with pitches or games. You guys are the good idea men.
At least you attempt to create games for us. We both fail at that, so we do appreciate it.
This is true. All right, I do have one last final set of thoughts, because my last set of thoughts is the Sonyverse worth saving? And the answer is almost completely no. Right, the set of movies is not a. I mean, look,
right out of my mouth.
Venom 2 is a cinematic masterpiece. Obviously, it's the fact that it got snubbed at the Oscars, right? But the question really is, should we try to save it because it's the only thing competing with the MCU? And I think that if the MCU, I mean, it's Sonyverse and the DC universe, which is also a complete garbage dumpster fire mess, right? And if those go away, there is no competition with the MCU for this dominating central pillar of the culture, which is the superhero movie. And then there's no incentive for them to actually do anything good anymore. Does that make sense to you guys?
It makes sense, but what's weird is it's not like the Sonyverse and MCU are different per se, because you have, we had Vulture from MCU come in, so it's almost like it's the MCU's little brother more than it's a competition.
More like the redheaded stepchild.
Right.
Right. That's yeah. All right. Yeah, that's fair.
And I mean, it's a bit like the two hands of the same person fighting each other. I mean, they're both under the same umbrella, aren't they? Wait, no, not Sony. Kind of rights wise, it's like if they actually make a competent film, Marvel Studios could be just like, all right, we've changed the deal, hand them over.
Yeah.
And it's just, I don't know if that's why they're doing it, or if they're just giving us bad stuff, and then they're gonna hit us with something like super cool, like, I don't know, the Living Mummy movie. If you nerds know what that is, not you two nerds on the podcast, but if you're listening to that and you know who that is, you're pretty cool. But yeah, I burn it down. Let the execs sort it out.
I feel like the big thing with these films, I was mentioning this to Joe as well, is they really need to, and this is to Sony's detriment, they rarely attempt to actually invest in hiring on good writers for these movies. Like, Morbius is a great example. The peaks that they have directed are The Last Witch Hunter and the new Power Rangers movie. That's like, that's their peak writing right there. So,
oh no,
yeah, and so you have that, and they're paying people to do that, and I almost feel bad because you get decent directors like Daniel Espinosa, he's directed a couple films which are fine. Even before this, the two Venom films, got Andy Serkis and Ruben Fleischer, both. Ruben Fleischer's a great director. Andy Serkis is more of an actor, but he still directed a couple things. I think it's less the direction, more they just hire these people who are dirt cheap to write their movies, and they just film this trash. And I'm looking over here at Kraven the Hunter, and it's like you have a decent director, and looking at the people they got to write it, you got the same people who just wrote this mediocre Uncharted movie that just came out. And some of the more recent Transformers films. And it's like, if they would just stop that, if they could either get some brand new talent that is eager to prove itself, because that's a better bet than people who have already failed over and over again. Either get that or get some decent people, some decent writer-directors who can write their vision and shoot at the same time. Either one of those would be better than getting a decent director. So almost this promise that it will be good. It's almost like, a sandwich that looks really good on the outside, but then you bite into it and it's raw kind of thing.
Yeah.
So they'll get this cool name for the director on the front of it. And the problem is they directed trash because that's what they were given by the writers. And so I think that's really the big thing that they have to fix, is they really have to prefer them to invest in some director who hasn't done much, a cheaper director who's maybe, filmed some good TV or something like that, and really put more investment into those screenwriters, because I really think that would help and give these films more respect instead of them being a bit of a joke at this point.
Now, Jack, I do agree with you there. And was it, well, before I get into this little stinger that I'm going to bring up, it's like I think the big reason is just that these hack writers, they get results. I'm afraid that the sad part is you pair a hack writer with a decent director, they get results in terms of financials. I mean, the last Transformers movies, Power Rangers was not a very big commercial success, but it's good enough. These teams are made to make products instead of films.
Oh, sure. No, I agree
Exactly.
that these films.
That's the big problem.
I agree that the films do, like some of these films that they've written, they do well. Some of them, although Power Rangers, that's no excuse. Like these films that the people who directed Morbius, the people who wrote those, the guy who did Uncharted and Transformers and all that, almost accept that for Kraven, because these are all films. You look at the box office, fine, but you look at the box office, these other films, they didn't do well. So why you would hire them on unless you just had the worst budget possible and there was nobody else available? That's the only reason I can see. But as far as people who get results, I do see where you're coming from there, Joseph. But it's just sad that a lot of people will sacrifice results over an actually good product.
Yep, and that is the worst thing, because I mean, oh man, if we ever talk about the Transformers movie, that's the last of those are the perfect example of, wow, this is a garbage movie, a garbage product. However, it made money because who knows why.
Yeah.
And it made some executives very rich, very happy, and it's a mystery as to how. On almost mystery, but and then the other thing I was gonna bring up, it's like, yes, bring in these smaller directors. Well, Jack, would it terrify you to know that, well, one of these smaller directors was Chloe Zhao, director of Eternals?
She's not a smaller director. I know what you mean.
I know. I just want to bring up Eternals.
Well, I mean, I will say Morbius is better than Eternals. You can quote me on that.
Oh,
yep.
Because we had a likable character in that of Matt Smith, whereas the other film had pretty much zero likable characters. Pretty much, I would say.
Exactly, zero likable characters.
Yeah. So
I suppose she is. She's kind of small in the film scene. I mean, 2 films is not small. The 3 films?
Well, the difference is she's like 2 or not only 2 or 3, and it's different if you do 2 small mini budget films. These are all small, Oscar-worthy, critically acclaimed films.
It's true.
That's the difference. It's like, so she had no excuse.
I do think the budget did have a lot to do with that, because I suppose when I was thinking small, it's not, again, mega movies isn't cheap, but I suppose hers weren't blockbuster level on the terms of the budget she was given with Eternals, which might have been part of the problem. But anyway.
Heck, I would have been fine if she had told him a smaller story with these characters. I would have been fine with that. I don't need a big budget Marvel film. I just need a good story. And if Chloe Zhao, I don't know why I did quotes for Chloe Zhao, but like that's her last name, clearly.
If that is your last name.
If that is your real name. Oh, okay.
So Chloe Zhao, as she calls herself, if she'd want to tell a more laid back story like her previous films, which I think were smaller budget Oscar winning films, I wouldn't complain. I feel like a lot of people would have loved that. But the thing is, she decided to do a big budget thing, which frankly would have it might have just been it was out of her comfort zone. That could have been one of many issues. But yeah, I'm done talking about Eternals. We did an episode on that.
Yeah. All right. Well, so we can definitively conclude Morbius is better than the Eternals.
Yep.
But that's not a compliment.
BTE.
Afraid so.
Better than Eternals.
BTE.
And as far as we know, there really isn't anything worth salvaging in the Sonyverse unless they can get some good, competent writers involved.
Right. Unless they can start actually caring.
Yep. Unless they can start caring about writing stories as opposed to here is this thing that we can put in front of you in order to get some money out of your pockets. So, and our conclusion is, if you got to this point, if you've been listening, first of all, thank you for listening. If not, all you've missed is us ragging on the Eternals and Morbius. Sorry, all you missed is ragging on Morbius and also the Eternals. It's tacked on there at the end.
It's too true. Oh no.
Which do not waste your time. Listen to my synopsis at the beginning, and you will have a better time than you will have watching Morbius. And also, don't fund them making more of these garbage movies. Incentivize them making good stories by only going to watch good stories.
Go pirate the old 90s Spider-Man cartoon, and you'll get more out of Morbius then through that than you will even watching a trailer for this.
That's probably not a bad suggestion. I mean, don't pirate anything, obviously.
I think you can just watch it on Disney Plus if you have that.
Oh yeah, that's right. I definitely do that first, and don't do that thing I said.
Yes.
Wink, wink.
All right. Well, like I said already, if you've been listening thus far, thanks for sticking with us. And if not, hey, you didn't miss very much. This wasn't that good of a movie. We've been Background Noise, and goodbye.
Jack Joe, look out! It's Mikey Morbius. Ah!